Tom, it is a real joy to get to talk to you. I've followed your work for some time, and I just a quick side note. I actually went back to college a few years ago, and I have my PhD in mythology. So
Wow.
this is your
Oh
work
wow.
is like everything to me.
Yeah.
So
I
you
feel a
are
little I feel a little undereducated here. I'm a pure
no. You
amateur kind of mythology person. So.
you are believe me, you are a hero to me. Your work is just incredible. So
Oh, well, thank you so much, man. That
yeah.
means a lot to hear from someone who's deeply immersed in it like that. Where
uh,
did you study mythology? Like
yeah,
what?
I studied at Pacifica Graduate Institute, and they they walk us through the work of everybody from Padraig O'Callaghan all the way up through Joseph Campbell and the more recent
Yeah,
stuff. And
yeah.
but a lot, most of it, is spent in the deep folklore of different cultures throughout history around the world. So
Amazing. Oh, that's a particular interest for Ross and I. That's so interesting. Yeah, and I've been listening to Ross and I have been listening to world like lots of different folklore. I've been listening to a lot of Native American stuff actually, and I'm so fascinated. When you mentioned Joseph Campbell, I'm fascinated by the connections. The similarities are so fascinating. There's something about the human condition in it all that yeah, I mean, yeah, that's been my work. So it's so great. Yeah, nice to chat to
it's so good to chat with you, and
you.
I that kind of leads us to my first question for you. And you everything from your earlier stuff with the Kahlil Gibran work up through the current trilogy of folklore that you've explored with Book of Kells and now with Wolfwalkers. Can you talk about what has drawn you to mythology and folklore, and that being such a rich source of material for you to draw from?
Oh yeah, I mean it's so huge and so endless. I think goes back to when I was a teenager and I was in Young Irish Filmmakers, and we got a lecture from a guy called Michael Adelson who was some teacher in New York or something, and it was amazing because he showed us like the Bella Bette and Highlander and all sorts of movies, and drew connection between movies that I loved like Star Wars or whatever, and folklore and mythology, and kind of opened up my eyes as a young teenager how deep some of these themes were. In what seemed to be the cool latest comic or whatever actually had threads going back to like ancient Greece or whatever. So all of that stuff, and then I think when I was in animation school, there was a trend at the time for Disney to sort of do things like Mulan and stuff from different cultures, and I sort of felt it would be nice to get a chance to do an Irish feature before they did.
Yeah. Well, you obviously being born and growing up in Ireland, you're immersed in so much history and folklore, around narrative and Newgrange being close by. And can you talk about just the importance of story and storytelling to sort of your growing up? What made you want to tell stories?
Well, it's really interesting because when I look back on it, there was stuff everywhere, but it was as a kid, it there was one guy called Eddie Lenahan who's like a shanky, and he used to be on TV, and he would do like the 10-minute tales, and he'd tell stories just like, but just on TV in between the cartoons. And like I loved it, but I also preferred the cartoons, right? And it was like my grandmother was full of stories and superstition and everything, but I associated that with like kind of boring old fogey generation, and so like I said, it was more, I was first drawn more to like popular culture and like modern stuff, and it was only as I got older that I started to appreciate that we had something to say that was unique, that might be interesting to the rest of the world rather than just kind of copying Japanese animation or American animation. So yeah, I kind of appreciate it backwards. And then my son was growing up, it was the Celtic Tiger, and I was really conscious that Irish stuff was getting rediscovered, but kind of commercialized and like packaged for tourists or whatever. So you either learnt about it in school or you saw it represented in a way that was very commercial or consumer culture. So I kind of wanted to retell the stories in a format that his generation would enjoy.
Yeah. Well, speaking of animation, as a creator, you can tell stories in so many different ways and formats and mediums, but what do you find about the medium of animation that is unique in storytelling? How can you tell stories in that medium maybe differently than with other mediums?
Oh, because it's so close to the language of dreams, and I think the language of dreams is so close to the language of mythology. Like it's just it's so acceptable in an animated world. Like I know with live action and CG you can do anything, but it's still a little bit of a stretch whenever you see a George Clooney turn into an eagle or something, something crazy like that. Where in an animated movie, a character is already a little bit of a dreamlike cipher, and then they can transform and metamorph and represent different things, and you can have more layers of meaning in how they're drawn. So you don't just have the actor's performance, but actually the way you've designed the character and how you draw the character can communicate something else as well. And yeah, it also feels kind of timeless. Kind of feels like a picture book or an illuminated manuscript. A hand drawn movie. It kind of feels it fits that kind of storytelling, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk specifically about Wolfwalkers. Um, Robin's character is a character that while I've never been a young girl before, I
Me
relate to
neither.
her so yeah, no, you neither. I relate to her so deeply. There's something that's very archetypal about who
Yeah.
she is that is universal. Can you talk about how why did you choose to tell this story through the eyes of a young girl?
Yeah, and originally the idea was for it to be a little boy, um, and I'd done two movies already. One with Nora, The Secret of Kells, and A Song of the Sea, and they were a little boy, and we were struggling early on, with why this little boy. What would be the obstacles to this little boy being a hunter in this world, and why would he change his point of view? And so when Nora suggested that we think about them as two little boys, we were like, ah, no, let's do two little girls. It's so much more interesting, and it kind of clicked together for me then. Like the idea that Robin, like we kept the name Robin Goodfellow, but because it worked for a girl as well, and I kind of based her a bit on my wife when she was a kid, because she's kind of fierce and independent, but also very gentle and loves animals and stuff, and I sort of just feel like that. Clicked together, and that's what made the story really work, because Robin and Maeve are like two sides. It's a bit like um, what's it, a bit like Gilgamesh or something, It's like two sides of a person. Um, and yeah, so it was the fact that they were both little girls, that Robin could see her direct opposite in Maeve, or an opportunity to live a different way that she didn't have herself. Yeah, it's interesting. And even at the time, people like Greta Thunberg, and I was thinking about young Jane Goodall, like these very passionate young women that stood up to authority on behalf of animals and the natural world. She kind of spoke to that.
Let's talk about that authority. This character of Lord Protector is a really timely and relevant character in the
I
world that
know.
we live in so many ways. Was that something you thought about, or did that sort of just arise?
It arose during the development. I mean, Oliver Cromwell was a real guy, and he wasn't. He's not much loved in Ireland, and we knew we didn't want it to be literally Oliver Cromwell, because that's loaded with all the baggage of representing a historical figure, and he's like a hero in England. So, but we knew that that kind of spirit of colonialism, of kind of thinking that you should control and dominate, was what we wanted to represent. So at that time period in Ireland, I mean, we still have the ripples of it to today. In that time period, it was very much that the English saw that they were civilizing us, and they were going to take control of the country for our own good, and that kind of ruling kind of through fear. Um, yeah, we have seen a lot of that coming back.
Yeah, yeah. Um, can you talk about what you have these really fascinating characters, the two girls and the Lord Protector and all the other, cast of characters. Can you talk a little bit about the creative process of how that begins to come together, and how you put the puzzle together of all these characters to tell this larger story?
Yeah, it's interesting because we had the basic idea over lunch that a kid who wanted to be a hunter would make friends with another kid who turns out to be one of the animals they're trying to hunt. You know, that was the basis of it. And the wolf people of Ossory was like local folklore that I remembered, and that I was conscious that was, you know, ripe for the kind of reinvention. You know, so those were the basic. That was the basic thing that we started with, that a hunter would see the world through the eyes of their prey, and that would change how they see everything. You know, just being in someone else's shoes. Um, so that came together fairly early, and then the dad and Lord Protector became way too interesting because Ross and I are two middle-aged guys, and we suddenly started relating to what would it be to be, you know, either of those guys, or how their relationship would be. So we spent a long time exploring that, and actually had to do quite a lot of rewriting during the storyboard phase, when we realized that the girls were the heart of it, and we needed to, you know, see it from their point of view. And then other characters like Maeve's mum Moll, again, really interesting character. We were layering in lots of different archetypes again in who she was or how she would be. And then again, the story demanded that we pair her right back in order to keep the focus on Maeve rather than on her. And Sean Og, the woodcutter who's protesting against what the English are doing, is kind of a stand-in character to represent the point of view of the native Irish, you know. So they all kind of had a role to play, and they all ended up then becoming their own personalities as the story evolved. You know, it is a funny thing, storytelling, because also movies are short. You know, they're like a short story, not a novel. So you have to be fairly ruthless. Like, you might have ideas to go in lots of different directions, but you have to keep it pretty focused. You know.
Well, you mentioned, Wolfwalkers in the local folklore for you, but wolves themselves are a really interesting part of this story. And did you find that wolves, lent themselves to the symbolism that you were trying
Oh
to
yeah.
get at?
Yeah, so charismatic, so misunderstood. So, you know, we wanted to speak to speciesism too, that like wolves are represented as these awful, terrible pests, and the equating Irish people with wolves was a great tool in the colonial days, because Ireland was called Wolfland, you know, because it was so full of wolves and rebels, and there was a connection between Irish people and wolves that went back. Like, the name in Irish for wolf is Mac Tira, which is son of the land, and there was this connection where, you know, young men would spend a certain amount of time wolfing when they were training, you know, to be warriors or whatever. They tried to live like wolves and all. So there was a connection, and then by wiping out the wolves, it was like speaking on so many different levels to what's going on today with species extinction, but also particularly speaking to this idea that you can kind of tame a people by breaking their connection with their totem or with their, you know. So the fact that we haven't had wolves in Ireland since like the late 1700s, and the fact that Irish people have all but forgotten this connection, was in itself a sort of interesting, sad theme. And then the fact that wolves had been seen, so, and these wolves of Ossory, these like werewolf stories, were so different than like the German stories, which was more about a primal wildness that needs to be kept inside. These stories were more about a balance, that you could kind of be both at the same time. So those were all, yeah, the themes we were playing with.
Mm. A good number of my audience is creatives who are also storytellers, and you've been someone who has been tremendously successful with your storytelling.
Blows
What?
my mind. It's so lucky. Such a confluence of luck and everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been amazing.
Well, what have you learned? What can you pass on to other creatives as far as advice goes? What have you learned along the way?
Oh, yeah. I try and pare it down. I mean, one of the biggest things of the one of the best things that has allowed me to do this is collaboration. Has been surrounding myself by people who wanted to go on the journey with me, and you end up learning so much from each other. And like, anything I could have done on my own would have been so much less than what I've been able to, you know. So when I joined Young Irish Filmmakers as a kid, I really think that's the biggest thing I took away. I mean, we learned how to use technology that's now obsolete, but we also learned how to work with each other. And I think collaboration has been huge, and honest feedback, and having people that whose opinion, you know, you trust, and that they'll give you the feedback. And yeah, it's your tribe, it's your wolf pack, you know. It's the people that you surround yourself with, because I think creatives can tend to be sometimes be a little bit lonesome and a little bit what's the word, shy of sharing their work. But if you have a trusted wolf pack around you, it can help a lot.
Yeah, wow, that is a really powerful piece of advice that fits so well into this story that you have told.
Yeah, they're all self-reflexive. These stories are all self-reflexive. It's so funny. My wife writes as well, and she's really talented, and she can really get into another character. But I always see that there's a little bit of something in her that she's working out through it. So it's just like that, I think.
Yeah, yeah. What do you feel you were working through in creating Wolfwalkers?
The whole three movies, when I look back on them, there was something about parenthood and letting go. And I mean, my son is growing up now. I'm a grandfather, and you never stop learning about um, the relationship between children and parents. And then because I was so young, and my wife and I were so young when we had our son, we were kind of out of step with everyone else. So there's been an ongoing theme of kind of the outsider and trying to see where you fit in if you're not quite in the same, you're not going through life in the same order that everyone else is and everything like that. So, and even as a kid, because I was from the north of Ireland and I didn't quite fit in, and I was more conscious of the differences than kids who just grew up here in Kilkenny. I think there was some, it was a lot of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, wow. I 10-second side note. 2 years ago, I traveled back to Glencolin in order to. That's where all
Wow.
my relatives are
Oh,
from.
in Donegal.
Yeah, in
Oh, you
Donegal.
have to
Yep.
watch. You have to watch Song of the Sea because that's where the kids begin and end their journey as Glencullen. Yeah.
Oh, I will get it immediately because
You
that's
will like it
my
if you're a
heritage.
mythology guy. Yeah, if you're a mythology guy, the Song of the Sea has got everything, Mock Lear, everything, and yeah, Glencullen is so beautiful.
Oh,
I went
so
up. The art director, the art director was a French guy, and I brought him up there to show it to him, and he was like, you know, trop mignon. It's too cute. It's already done. There's nothing to do. It's perfect like it is. There's no creation to do here. You know.
amazing, amazing. Well, the last thing I'd like to ask you about, Tom, and thank you for being so gracious with your time to talk to
Oh
me.
no, no,
So
it's a pleasure,
appreciative.
pleasure.
Um, I wonder what is a creator and the creator of this trilogy and this particular film. Um, what would be your hopes of what audiences might walk away with from this film or even this trilogy as a whole?
Mm. Well, there's lots of stuff, right? And on one level, I just hope it's entertaining and interesting and a little insight into a culture that isn't always represented authentically. And then another level, I mean, they're all a love letter to hand drawn animation, so I hope it inspires kids. I was inspired watching hand drawn cartoons to try and make my own thing. But then on a deeper level, yeah, you wonder how much you can really say without being preachy, but they all sort of speak to the importance of stories and the importance of seeing that kind of hidden truth in folklore that connects us back to the landscape that predates and hopefully will outlive the current kind of consumer minded culture we all live in. So that stuff is the stuff you can only hope that it trickles out somehow, but you can't beat it over people's heads, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, is someone who has invested their whole life in the ancient stories. Again, you have done us all proud. So,
Oh,
we're
thank you.
so
That means a
thankful for
lot.
you.
That means a lot. I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, and I mean, all our movies, even Nora's films like Breadwinner, they all speak to the power of stories because that's the heart of that's the heart of a culture and it's the heart of humanity that we are the stories we tell ourselves. So let's tell ourselves stories that are gonna improve our lot rather than drag us down. So that's beautiful. Oh, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate that.